I hope you've developed a thick skin and a high threshold for disgusting things, because this movie gets nasty. We open over a rainforest at dusk and take a trip down the lazy river. Deep in the heart of the forest, Mr. Manley is eventually delivered to Dr. Atherton's camp. Arriving late, he is immediately whisked off toward the wilderness. His task is to photograph their venture into a tepui,
a place where species have survived in isolation for millions of years.
On the way in, Manley is provided the helpful warning that much of the fauna here would desire to digest his nutrient-rich flesh, so it's best to try not to touch or be touched by anything. In the dense Venezuelan rainforest, we get some big Jurassic Park vibes as they touch down near a lush sinkhole. The equipment is lowered to the bottom as they prepare to hike it, guideless, as the tribesman who has agreed to assist them only promised to take them as far as the trailhead apparently. Well, thanks, I guess. They reunite with their equipment and Manley face plants his way into a terrible discovery, which is brushed off as they proceed deep into the belly button of the wilderness. They find a nice big tree and begin setting up. The plan? Smoke 'em if you got 'em. They don't have to wait long before untold quantities of specimens rain down on them, with only about 10% actually landing in the jars they set up. As they sift through, greedy for new discoveries, they hear some louder thuds and find a collection of big honkin' spiders. They're amazed to find that they survived the smoke show, so they snag a couple of samples plus one stowaway. Back at the camp, it's discovered that these are soldier spiders. They have no reproductive organs and likely serve a single general. Fascinating as this all is, Manley needs to go try to nap off his fever. Unfortunately, he has an unwelcome bedfellow which sinks its bite things into him, exacerbating his already present illness to a significant degree. When he's found, they presume he succumbed to his fever, allowing them to proceed with a clean conscience. With no reverence for the empty shell, they strip his belongings of any valuable film stock and then send his empty meat suit back stateside in a shipping crate sans packing materials, but with one more spider than is typically desirable. On the other side of the water, we catch up with the hearse as it delivers him to a simple small-town funeral home. Irv cracks the top and then makes a quick call about the open casket situation. You see, Big Roy's taken advantage of the long trip over to turn Manley into his own personal bento box. He then shuffles out, scaring off the domestics before being granted fast travel by a passing crow. He manages to end the livery service right near an old barn, right as the Jennings roll up to their new home. Here we meet Ross, who has arrived in Canaima with his family to raise his children in a nurturing environment, take over the practice of the soon-to-retire town physician, and to find enough space to stretch out and build a bitchin' wine cellar. Tom rushes out to complain that there's a spider on his stuff. In this household, it's the wife's duty to handle these situations, so Molly gently removes the spider and gives her a new home in the barn. That evening, the couple briefly discusses their anxieties and expectations around their new life away from the city and provide each other carnal comfort. While Barnside, a couple of new acquaintances come together in similar sensual pleasure. The next day, we find Ross in dire straits. Old man Metcalf has thought it over and decided that he wants to postpone his retirement. To add to this, Sheriff Parsons declines to show the reverence Ross feels is owed to the new hotshot young doctor. Ms. Hollins comes to his rescue, helping him navigate the town politics, and recognizing the need for some fresh blood in the medical field, offers to be his first patient. Sure enough, utilizing more recent medical information, he's able to take her off her hypertension medication as it's not recommended based on her results. Margaret then offers to throw Ross an open house to help him meet and network with the townsfolk and build up his patient base. Meanwhile, bored at home, Molly decides to scope out their fully furnished barn to see if she can get any good shots. Here, she finds nature hard at work and becomes enamored with its boundless majesty. That evening, Molly suggests Ross face down this web as a form of acclimation therapy to get over his fear of spiders. On the way out, we learn that his crippling fear stems from his first memory as a baby. A disgusting, hairy spider invaded his crib and crawled all over his helpless body, instilling in him an instinct to freeze in response to a spider's threat. Regardless, he climbs the ladder and takes a face shot from a desiccated rat, and the couple runs off giggling while a bubbling mass throbs nearby. The next day, we see that there are parties all over town. Ross is busy trying to get between the blue hairs and their lust for deviled eggs so he can talk medical conditions and their treatment. nest. While back at the barn, the broodlings are absolutely popping off and venturing into the surrounding areas. As the guests filter out and Margaret basks in the glow of a successful party, an unassuming arachnid lies in wait. It seeks to grow fat on the house cat's sweet juices. Unfortunately, after being put out, Ms. Hollins is now the only animal left in the house. The next day, while working in the cellar, Ross discovers why it's worth spending a bit extra on an experienced home inspector. Molly offers to call the exterminator if Ross goes to check on Margaret, who she can't reach. When he gets there, the paper is uncollected and the cat is still outside. In the aftermath, Metcalf declares her dead by heart attack, which they blame on Ross taking her off her meds. With no authority or influence, Ross is unable to compel them to conduct an autopsy just to be sure. However, in a positive turn of events, Mr. Beachwood takes pity on Ross and requests he come by the gym later so he can throw him some business. We then get the pleasure of meeting Delbert, who arrives at the Jennings residence to assess their termite problem. The main points to take away here are that Delbert's a goofball, as implied by his musical accompaniment, and also that aside from the rotted wood, he curiously doesn't find any actual presence of termites. While this is going down, Ross arrives at the gym. He and Henry exchange pleasantries about rural life, but also note the recent conspicuous absence of crickets singing their evening song. Then Ross heads down the line, cupping some sacks and making himself a quick $50. Afterward, at practice, we see the brood has been spreading through town, with one soldier even finding its way into Miller's helmet. So as the boys run a play-action nickel with an audible, Miller ends up going down and declines to get back up. Ross sets aside his notations of scrotal tenacity to rush out and provide aid, but after missing the spider when it casually saunters out of the helmet, they're all left holding their own scrotes wondering what the hell happened. We learn later that this series of events has earned Ross the unfortunate moniker Dr. Death. Lamenting the recent misfortune brought upon them by his upstart rival, Metcalf decides to relax a little by slipping his slender hog into the comforting warmth of his loafers. But he gets bit. He is immediately thrown into a sizable seizure, providing the key bit of evidence he would need to try to crack this thing wide open. Except he's DOA. However, with him now out of the way, Ross is able to convince the county coroner to perform an autopsy. Although, as the town's new physician by default, Ross barely has a chance to follow up on it. When complete, the coroner does confirm a minute amount of an unidentified toxin found in Metcalf's system. With something to go on, Ross calls for some exhumations to gather additional evidence. In the meantime, he does warn the family to be wary of the dangers of spiders and the importance of steering clear of those you see. He then does research into the night and falls victim to a rabid cricket attack, a lone survivor of the unseen spider-cricket war happening all around him. While he's busy diddling that one, a couple of boss spiders pull an egg sac into his cellar. His research leads him to Dr. Atherton, the top Spider-Man on the West Coast whose curiosity is piqued when the town named Canaima holds some vague recognition in the back of his mind. So he sends his assistant Collins to check it out, and he's lucky to arrive just in time for them to start examining some rotting corpses. Before he can step out for a quick puke, they find bite marks on each of the bodies. The next step would be quarantine, but this exceeds his authority, so he calls Dr. Atherton to confirm his expertise is required. The next day, a crack team of arthropod enthusiasts enter Margaret's home to search out the culprit. With evidence and set up shop in the backyard, they know they're closing in. As they ponder this, Lloyd finds the prize in his cereal box. Since the preference would be to find a live one, they continue on and eventually end up in a staring contest with the harbinger of their doom. Collins convinces Ross to run a distraction so he can try to nab it, as if it doesn't have an abundance of eyes. But in fairness, his technique does work. Meanwhile, at the Beachwood residence, the spiders are practically having a party, as one uses the playful tickling of the water to blend in and descend Becky's torso. The end result of this is a post-puberty nightmare. They call in Delbert for an emergency extraction of the pests, and upon running across one on the back deck, he finds this breed to be remarkably impervious to the typical spray formula. But he always has the boot as a backup. After taking care of that problem, Del then saunters off like a true badass. Atherton finally shows up and learns that Ross has connected the dots for him between the excursion in Venezuela and Manley the photographer, who was a resident of their town. They then inspect the specimen's triple sacs and test its venom, which has an alarmingly immediate effect. Atherton then lays it all out. These dickless soldiers are part of a highly organized colony, the likes of which have only been seen in the Venezuelan sample. It's an apex species led by a general dick-slanger that, in this environment, is no longer bound by geography. If the queen is able to finish a breeding cycle, the outcome will be a whole host of childbearing offspring that will look to expand out to new territory. so game over. They presume the point of origin to be the mortuary where the casket was received, and since Irv has the phone off the hook, they posse up. We find Irv in a social media blackout so he and his wife can enjoy Wheel of Fortune, a tradition that severely dates this movie. Along the way, Collins discusses the ideal nest location.
Dark, warm, moist, a musty smell.
I like the cut of your jib, my friend.
And you'd probably see an egg sac, pulsating about the size of a softball.
Where would one sign up? But by the time they arrive, the Kendalls have been sucked dry. When Atherton goes to leave the office, Molly's photography sets him off in a different direction. He and Lloyd roll up to the barn, and luckily, he brought a jar, so they should be all good. Atherton sends Lloyd off to fetch the others. Except after failing to find the nest, they've already figured out the correct location based on the radius of initial victims. As they drive in that direction, Delbert points out that the barn is not ideal for a nest, but he finds that he's casting his pearls before swine as they dismiss his valuable input. Back at the barn, Atherton bafflingly enters the den and rings the dinner bell, ultimately reaping what he sows. Then the trio arrives and Delbert uncorks his private stock of insecticide, made of his own formula that proves to be fairly caustic. He employs it as the others go to check the house. Ross ventures in real slow and quiet-like, creeping out his family in the process. Then they find a real good reason to be creeped out and are forced to run up the stairs to hide. Unfortunately, doors are essentially useless in this scenario, as their assailants file in through every crack and crevice, looking to find warmth in all of their cracks and crevices. As they exit, Ross delays too long, forcing him back into the house. Delbert tries to work his way in from the outside as Ross takes the elevator down. Unfortunately, he pressed the button for the basement rather than the lobby. Now every itch feels like spiders to him, but the area is actually relatively arachnid-free, due to the presence of the Queen, of course. He attempts to excuse himself, but is relentlessly pursued. Despite the size differential, he can barely do more than flaccidly swat at her, but then she surprises him into scream-tossing his shovel into the breaker box. He then searches for and finds the egg sac, which is pulsating in a rhythmically seductive way. He goes to innocently burn it to a crisp when the general rears its ugly head. Ross ends up stuck under what must be a full 10 to 15 pounds of wine rack, but he manages to get out somehow and chases him down with a makeshift flamethrower. And damn it if he doesn't start having some fun with it. He listens acutely for any movement and readies himself, but is not ready enough. In the ensuing struggle, he ends up supine with that hairy bitch crawling up his leg, reverting him to a baby-like state in which he becomes frozen in fear. He uses a wayward stick to catapult the general across the room and then pulls off a lucky nail gun shot that sends him into the nest, annihilating the entire species. A truly sad story. As we close the movie, we find this all to have been an indictment of country living, as they happily settle back into their San Francisco apartment, never addressing the question of how they're going to raise their kids now that they're back in the city. And then nature gets the last laugh. That one was definitely pushing the limit, but if you're still looking to get nasty, be sure to check out this video next. Now that we're here, I want to congratulate you for making it to the end of the video, and affirm that you are a very special person because of it. And if you enjoyed the video, I would love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.